So I sat there watching this meeting with Jerome Powell, the Treasury Secretary, and Congress, and I was sitting there taking notes. And after Jerome Powell said that he needs to retire the word transitory, he also said that the inflationary pressures are, quote, more persistent. And he said that we're seeing the factors that are causing higher inflation to be more persistent. He also says that the inflationary risks have, quote, soared up. And because of these higher inflationary risks, at the next Federal Reserve Bank meeting, they're going to try to take more measures to help cool down inflation. But the most interesting thing about that is that Jerome Powell then said that, well, yes, inflation is not transitory. And yes, inflation is worse than we expected. And yes, the inflationary risks are higher. He still said that he expects inflation to cool back down in the second half of 2022. So let me diagram what that means. So I just put a little chart here with this side being inflation, 1% inflation, 2% inflation, and on. And this is the year 2020, 2021, and 2022. The Federal Reserve Bank's goal was to take this lower inflation that we saw in 2020 and try to keep inflation around 2% a year. That was their goal. But what ended up happening was they started to ramp up this inflation, and then they hit 2%, and then they just kind of boom, and then went way up here to 6%. And now what they're saying is that in 2022, their goal is to bring inflation right back down to here. The original plan, according to this inflation is transitory, is we were going to see some higher inflation, not this high, thought that it'd be something around here, but then inflation would cool down and we would see the prices of things drop, and then it would level off at this 2%, because then you would see prices of things normalize, the cost of living will go back down, and then they could kind of keep this 2% inflationary target. So now they've kind of given up on this idea, but they're saying that in the second half of 2022, we're going to see inflation come back down to around 2%. So what that means is the prices of things are going to continue going up, just not as fast as they are right now. Because right now, we're seeing inflation at somewhere between 5 to 6% a year right now, which is many multiples higher than what they were expecting and anticipating. And so now what they're saying is, okay, right now inflation is very high, but we're just trying to get inflation to go back down to normal, which means you're going to continue seeing the price of things go up, but just not as fast as they're growing right now. And actually, I just realized that I did this chart wrong, because what the Federal Reserve Bank was actually hoping for was not this, is they were hoping for this, because you would need to see actually some sort of deflation in order to see the price of things go down. Now, unfortunately, but not surprisingly, this became kind of a big political game, because Democrats and Republicans were both blaming this inflation on each other. Democrats are saying that the reason that we're seeing this higher inflation is because of higher demand, and Republicans were saying that the reason that we're seeing this higher inflation is because of these Democratic policies. So instead of trying to actually fix the problem, both of them were just pointing fingers at each other. Democrats were saying that all of a sudden, after this economy opened back up from the pandemic, we had this massive surge in demand for people wanting to go out and buy things, and this massive surge in demand overloaded companies, and then companies were not able to produce products, they were not able to get products because of the supply chain issues, and because of that, that caused the price of things to go up. Republicans said, no, it's not because of demand, it's because of these Democratic policies, these liberal policies. They're saying that it's because of all this money printing that President Biden wants to do in order to stimulate and in order to build back better. These are the things that are causing inflation. Now, what I'm about to say is going to trigger a lot of people on both sides of the political spectrum, but I'm not here to make friends, I'm here to educate, so let's go right into it. So when we talk about demand creating inflation, that really doesn't make any sense, because if you look at what created the sudden demand, well, this demand to buy products came out of thin air, because all of a sudden when this pandemic hit, people stopped working and people stopped producing. But what we did produce was money out of thin air. The Federal Reserve Bank, who's in charge of our monetary policy, started printing money out of thin air, and they started giving this money to corporations and people. So now all of a sudden people were getting money, stimulus checks, unemployment checks, and they were getting money from the government. They were getting this aid, and what did they do? Well, they were not encouraged to pay their landlords because the government said that you don't have to pay your rent. They were not encouraged to pay their mortgage because the government said you don't have to pay your mortgage. They were not encouraged to pay their student loans because the government said you don't have to pay your student loans. They had forbearance for all of this. Instead, they said you need to go and stimulate the economy. They said that you should go out and buy products, go buy goods from these big corporations and these big companies. So people took this free money, and then they went out and they started shopping. And they went out to the mall and started spending money. They went to Amazon and started spending money. And all these companies started getting orders, and they made their products not in the United States, but they make their products overseas. So now all of a sudden you had this massive demand, which came from what? People didn't actually work to earn this money. This money came out of thin air because people also didn't have any expenses, and then they were getting this money without producing. So people were getting this money, buying products made overseas, and these overseas factories are shut down. So now these overseas factories are getting overwhelmed with orders because we don't make these products in the States. These overseas factories are now trying to keep up with all this demand, and then they're trying to ship these products, and you have these shipping delays, and then you have the port delays in the United States, and then you have troubles getting the products from the ports into the factory. So you have the supply chain issues, which were then exacerbated by this demand created by what? Well, the demand was created by nothing. The demand was created by the Federal Reserve Bank. This is where then the Republicans started pointing fingers, and they said that no, it's not this demand that's creating this inflation, it are these democratic policies which are passing trillions of dollars of these new infrastructure bills, because now the government doesn't have trillions of dollars to fund these infrastructure bills, so the government has to print this money through the help of the Federal Reserve Bank, which causes more inflation. Now, obviously, more money printing causes inflation. That's what inflation is. Inflation is when you inflate the monetary supply. But we haven't seen the effects of any of these new bills yet. I mean, they haven't really entered our economic system, so we haven't felt the inflationary effects of them. And President Donald Trump also passed a $2 trillion historic stimulus bill in 2020 to help stimulate the economy. And then he passed another $900 billion stimulus bill in the later part of 2020 to help stimulate the economy. And he was pushing for more stimulus, he was pushing for negative interest rates, and he was fighting for higher inflation. So it really doesn't make sense to blame the current inflation that we're seeing on Democratic policies, but you have to imagine that these Democratic policies will lead to higher inflation in the future because they have big price tags that we cannot afford, and the way that you fund them is through higher inflation. But the inflation that we're seeing right now is not through these Democratic policies. We'll be feeling that inflation sometime in the future. And then you had Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and the Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell say that the reason why we're seeing this higher inflation is because of supply chain issues which were caused by this pandemic and because of this worker shortage and this worker crisis that we're seeing in America. That is the reason why we're seeing this inflation. It's not due to money printing. It's not due to the low interest rates. It's not due to the bond buying that the Federal Reserve Bank has been doing for the last year. It's just due to the supply chain issues. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen actually kind of hinted at this. She said that inflation is a matter of supply and demand, and we did see a massive surge in demand, and she said that a part of that demand was due to all the money printing that the Federal Reserve Bank did. But then she went on to say that this money printing was a very small reason for this higher demand. Which actually doesn't make any sense then. That yeah, when you have a massive demand and no supply, that's going to cause the price of things to go up. But to say that the demand was caused by a very small part due to the money printing really doesn't make any sense because the country was not working. We were not producing anything. Yeah, we were still printing money, and so people were able to spend money like crazy because now not only do you not have any expenses, you can go out and spend money. How can you say that this demand is only a small part due to money printing? And then on top of that, you also have extremely low interest rates, which also cause more inflation. Remember, inflation is when you inflate the monetary supply, when more dollars enter our economic circulation. Well, when you have low interest rates, well, that makes it more likely for people and businesses to borrow money. Because when interest rates are low, you're more likely to go to the bank and borrow money. You're more likely to go out and get a mortgage. And corporations are more likely to go out and borrow money because now they can borrow money for 3, 4, 5% interest and invest this money back into their company. If you can go out and borrow money at 4% a year and you are a multi-billion-dollar corporation and you can grow your company by 6% a year, well, now you are making billions of dollars off of this money because you're going to borrow money, billions of dollars at 4%, and all you got to do is grow your money by more than 4% for it to be profitable. And some of these big companies can reinvest this money back into the company and grow by 4, 5, 6, 7, even 20% a year. And so when you have low interest rates, it contributes to more inflation because now people are going to be more likely to go out and borrow money. And then they went on to kind of argue that this inflation that we're seeing is kind of a good thing because it shows how strong our households are in America, because the households in America have the buying power to go out and buy things even at these inflated prices. And so it shows that, hey, Americans are doing great. We have the money to go out and buy things, even though a lot of this money wasn't directly from producing things, but Americans have the money to go out and buy things. So the stimulus by the government and the Fed worked because now Americans are able to go out and buy things, even though now many Americans are struggling. Many Americans are going back into credit card debt. People are getting behind on their mortgages. People are getting behind on their rent. People are struggling to afford this higher cost of living because now home prices are higher, rental prices are higher, car prices are higher, grocery prices are higher, gas prices are higher, vacation costs are higher. Everything is getting more expensive, and what they said is this is a sign of a strong economy. People struggling to pay their bills is the sign of a strong economy. Makes a lot of sense. Then after all of this debate, that's when Jerome Powell said that it's no longer his view that these price hikes, this inflation, is temporary or transitory. He expects these price hikes to stay for a long time or forever, and his goal is now just to bring inflation down to a reasonable level, which in his mind is 2%. So his goal is in 2022 to bring inflation back down to 2022. If you enjoyed this short clip from my longer videos, here's another clip that I think you'll love. And while you're at it, if you're interested in learning more about how to start generating passive income, our team put together an amazing guide that goes over what passive income is, how to start generating passive income, and different passive income strategies. These are things that you can start doing even if you don't have a lot of money. So if you want to read this free guide on how to start generating passive income for free, all you got to do is click that button right over there. Thank you for watching, and as always, keep hustling.